Bookworms Horror Podcast is sponsored by Creepy Crate. Creepy Crate is a horror and true crime subscription box filled with spooky collectibles, macabre accessories, and terrifying goodies. Each bi-monthly box is filled with over $85 of terror and includes at least one horror or true crime book. This box delivers dread to your doorstep for just $39.99 with free shipping. Go to creepycrate.store to subscribe. Use the code Bookworm5 at checkout to get $5 off your subscription. That's Bookworm5 for $5 off your subscription. And now to the show. Yeah, so this week I thought we'd go over Robert Heinlein. Is that how you say it?
Yes, Heinlein.
Because you brought this up. I had said I wanted to do something about finish what you start, and you're like, that's one of Heinlein's rules. So then I was like, well, why don't we just start at number 1 and go through all 5 rules, each, not today. Today we'll do the first rule. But before that, let's talk about what we do with Bookworms. So Bookworms, there is issue 2 still available. And you can get that at Etsy. That's bookwormshorror.etsy.com. All these links are in the show notes. But I want to bring up that if you want to get issue 1 and you're on the East Coast, what's the store in Brooklyn that still has some issue 1s?
Troubled Sleep in Park Slope.
I love Park Slope.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I spent the day there the other day, and we had a great time.
Yeah. My wife's from Brooklyn, so like anytime we go up, we always go to Park Slope and we go eating, and the food's amazing.
We had like an incredible Turkish meal.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I know. I would probably put on 500 pounds if I lived in Brooklyn.
Well, you walk a lot though,
because you just walk so much up in New York, which I love.
I know. I love that too.
So Bookworms, we will have one coming out at the end of this month, beginning of February. We're working on that. That will be the horror love, I guess. I don't know what we want to call that.
My Bloody Valentine.
Oh, yeah, that's good. My Bloody Valentine issue. So that's coming out. And like I said, you still can get issue 2 online. But I think if you're in Newtown, Pennsylvania, we still have some issue 1s.
Yep, there were some. I was just there, a couple, whenever we went for our walk.
Yeah, so that's Newtown Book and Record Exchange in Newtown Borough. You can definitely pick that up, because the reason why I'm saying this is because you can't get it online. The only place you can get issue 1 now is whatever bookstore has it. Which are those the only 2 that have it, or is the Brooklyn? I mean, does Bristol?
The Bristol Books and Bindery may have a couple copies left too.
Okay.
I haven't checked in a while, but yeah, that's it.
Okay, so
maybe I was thinking, James, we can do a digest at some point.
Yeah.
Or we do like a yearly digest. We'll see.
Before we get into the rules, we both have YouTube channels. So Regina, I know you just posted a couple things.
Well, I just posted a kind of a Happy New Year video where I talk about what I've been doing and what I've been reading, which, I kind of did like a bit of a wrap up, not officially. And then Matilda has her January horoscopes up. Yeah,
so check those out.
And I just kind of getting back into the reading and writing swing of things for this new year, which is nice.
I will also be posting something on YouTube today, just a YouTube short. It's a line from Cormac McCarthy's The Road. I'm reading that. And I just go in and like talk about a sentence or something on the shorts, because you can't talk about a whole book on a short, So
and I want to read your short story that you posted. I have not read that yet, but it's on my list.
And actually, that short story I posted, it's called Malice in Wonderland. Or no, in Overland.
I love that.
Malice in Overland. But if we get to, what are we going to do? Number 5 rule is you must keep it on the market until sold. So I'm going to keep trying to send that story out.
You should, definitely.
And we'll talk about that when we get to that rule.
Okay. But, yeah. I look forward to. I mean, you told me what it was about, and I was intrigued. So now I get to read it. So that's cool.
Yeah. So that's our YouTube channels. Regina's is the Haunted Library.
Mine, and make sure you subscribe.
Yes, and mine is the Office of Demonology. And I also have a newsletter that will come out. Usually comes out every week, and that is also in the show notes. We have an Instagram, Bookworms Horror Zine. That's our Bookworms Horror Instagram. Carney is available, so if you want to go pick that up, we'll have that in the show notes too. So that's Regina's book.
Yes, and it's no longer on sale, but it's on Kindle Unlimited now. So
Somebody
that.
said on Instagram, I forget who it was, because I had posted something, and they're like, I picked it up because in Canada, I guess it's a little bit more, like $1.37 or something versus 99 cents.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, that's like a bargain. You know, they were like, I got it for $1.37, and I'm like, yeah, I said that I'm going to make Gina have to buy me coffee to make up for the.
Right.
I paid full price, but I don't mind. The full price is still worth it.
I owe you a coffee.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And this podcast, whatever you're listening to it on, if there's a way to review the podcast, if you can give us a 5-star review and tell us why you love it, because that helps us reach more people. And that's what we want to do, is help more people write.
Yep.
So let's talk about Robert Heinlein. What do you know about him, Regina?
Heinlein.
Yeah.
I only know that he was a pulp, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way, a science fiction writer and maybe some other genres in like the 50s and 60s. He wrote Starship Troopers, which is pretty famous. I have quite a few of his pulpy looking paperbacks from the 60s. I found there used to be a great bookstore over in Burlington, which unfortunately closed down, that had a lot of like old pulp novels. And he was extremely prolific.
Yes.
So he wrote a lot of not short stories, but shorter novels than we think about today. Those novels tend to be pretty short. And he had some ideas about, he made a living as a writer. And because of that, he had to work very hard to make his living as a writer. Like, he would write constantly and put his stuff out there, and was a true professional in that way. And he developed some rules to help writers. Now, there is a story behind the rules.
So
Dean Wesley Smith, who we had mentioned before.
Yeah, I'm on that page right now.
Yeah, he gives the story. That's how I heard about these rules, was through his channel a few years ago. And it was part of, I think it might have been part of a book. Science fiction writers were weighing in about writing tips, and those were Heinlein's rules, and they kind of stuck because they resonated with a lot of writers. Yeah,
according to Dean Wesley Smith, it came out in edition of Worlds Beyond, the Science of Science Fiction Writing. And Wesley Smith basically says that there's not really anything great, the articles in the book, except for these rules. And they were in there, and everything else is sort of forgettable. But these rules, for some reason, everybody latched onto these. So today we're going to talk about rule number 1, and it seems obvious, but rule number 1 is you must write.
Yep. But you know what? That's not as obvious as you might think.
Well,
because how many people struggle with that very thing, and they want to write. They want to be a writer, or they aspire to be a writer, or they're working on their being a writer. Maybe they're getting their degree, but they're still not writing, if that makes sense.
And what Heinlein had said is these rules are really hard to follow, and that's why he doesn't care that he's giving them out to his competition, if you want to look at it that way. Because he said,
that's interesting.
Yeah, they're so hard to follow that he was like, if you can follow these rules, you're going to be successful, is what he was saying. And that's, most people won't be able to. So he's not afraid of putting it out there.
Yes, and it's definitely a message of quantity, not saying over quality, but it is about getting this stuff out. It's like Dean Koontz, when I read his book on writing genre fiction, he really became this incredibly prolific writer because that's what he did all day. 8 hours a day was write, and he would put his stuff out there, and he would finish a short novel in a week under different pen names. He wrote all these different genres until he established himself, I guess, as his own. He was a horror writer, but then he kind of became a mystery writer. He still does a little bit of horror, but that's what you do to be that prolific. You have to write.
And it's obvious in any other art form. And if So when I was a kid, I picked up the bass guitar and I took lessons, but I did every day. I picked up that guitar and I played and I played. And I can confidently say I am a good bass player, right? I can play really well. I can play stuff that's hard, but I did it all the time. You wouldn't expect to be in a band if you don't practice. And
yeah, so we talked about that before, writing as practice. It's actually a really good way of approaching it. It takes the pressure off to create this masterpiece right out of the gate. And it's actually a lot more fun to sit down and put a timer on for an hour and say, I'm just going to write whatever. It doesn't have to be the start of my next novel. It doesn't really have to be anything. Just write and see what happens.
Yeah, I
think a little easier said than done. I think Heinlein was right. His rules are not that easy, but it really kind of gets down to that.
Right, and it's obvious with every other thing. Like you want to go play at Carnegie Hall, you got to practice, right? You're not going to end up there. You're not going to just all of a sudden sit down one day. And here's the one thing that a lot of the writers, authors who talk about this, they say that if you are a writer, you will walk around and meet people and maybe you'll tell them you're a writer and everybody will say, oh, you know what? When I get time, I want to sit down and I have a novel in me.
Right.
And the idea is like, oh, you play guitar? One day I'm going to sit down and I'm going to just write a rock opera.
Well, I do say that about playing guitar. I do have a rock opera in me, James. It's just I got to learn how to play the guitar first. Well, right. It's like last year, Joe bought me a really nice keyboard, and I have played a little bit, but I haven't been practicing every day like I should because it's at my studio, and I'm like, oh, I got to go over there and do it. But writing just comes a little more organically to me because I want to do it, and I've always done it. I was an incredible journal keeper my whole, when I was a kid, so I was always writing. But I think there is something about, we don't think of writing as practice. And I think we do have that idea of, I've got this great screenplay in me. If only I could get someone to write it for me. That kind of thing. You wouldn't hear of a violinist saying that. In fact, when I lived in New York, my neighbor was a professional violinist and she practiced for like 6 hours a day. And then she would go out to Carnegie Hall at night and play in the orchestra. Right. She was a true professional.
Right. I got this part of a quote from Joanne Ross, and I'm not sure who she must be an author, but she's in this book I have. And it says, no one believes they can pick up a cello and suddenly start playing like Yo-Yo Ma, or that watching every episode of Grey's Anatomy prepares you to perform surgery. Yet so many people seem to believe that the art of writing comes naturally. Mm. And that's true. And that's because we all, at some level, we possess some basic writing skills. And I think that's what people think. They don't see it as an art. It's just like, oh, writing is writing.
Right. But if you look at what you wrote, or I'll speak for myself. If I look at when I started writing, I know I'm a much better writer today because of all that writing I did and all the practicing. I look back at some of my early short stories and cringe, but that I was doing my best at that point, but I'm better now because I've practiced.
And you'll hear that from any author, if they're famous or not. I mean, they're going to say, yeah, I can't even read my earlier works, and some don't. Mm-hmm. Some don't even, like, once it's done, it's out there, they move on to the next thing and that's it. And that's also with film, a lot of directors who won't watch their movies, or actors who won't watch their movies.
Well, I think throughout your career, any artist hopefully will have those flashes of inspiration that combine with their craft to make something really special. The best film they've ever done, the best book they've ever written. Mm-hmm. But no one, I won't say no one because it happens, but very few people just come out of the gate with that first book and hit that. It's a lot of hard work.
But even if they come out of the gate with that first book and hit that, I doubt they sat down, wrote that first book, submitted it, and it got, like, they still probably wrote 6 or 7 drafts of that. You know, they probably had multiple failures before that. I don't know of anybody. I mean, sure there might be, but who literally just sat down, wrote a book, and submitted it and got it published.
I'm sure there. I can't think of anyone off the top of my head either. But most people,
I'm not going to say never, but
no.
But you know, it's highly unlikely that you're going to do that. And
it's also important to understand. And I know Anne Rice made this. I saw an interview with her. She used to have great interviews before she died on posted on her Facebook page. And she said, you know, writing is the only profession, like in the arts, where you can start at any age, and you don't need any kind of expensive equipment, and you can just begin. And that's true. That there is something special about it in that way. As long as you have the basic elements of language, you can do that. And sometimes, not that I don't recommend studying or going to college, but going to college and studying writing does not necessarily mean that you're writing. Like, you have to really put the effort into your craft, however that's defined. And it doesn't have to be every day. I like to do it every day because I try to, but it regularly. It's like you playing your bass. You got good because you worked on it.
Right. And there's days you don't. But I mean, the majority of the time I would pick it up. And then maybe for the weekend I didn't play or something. So, yeah, you don't. They always say write every day. But it's basically have a habit of writing. Right.
Right.
And whatever that habit may be for you, maybe you just habitually write on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Maybe you just write on the weekends. I
just saw an angry tweet where someone was complaining about being told to write every day. And I'm thinking, well, maybe we should get off Twitter.
I was just going to say, you need to get off Twitter, or X as it's called.
Right, or X. Because I've wasted so much time scrolling through Twitter. And I mean, that hour that it is relaxing, I guess, in some ways, just sit there and scroll, but that could be spent reading or writing.
Right. So Ray Bradbury had a commencement speech, 2002, Caltech. And here's what he said. I've written 10,000s of words that no one will ever see. I had to write them in order to get rid of them. But then I've written a lot of other stuff too. So the good stuff stays and the old stuff goes. I think that's something that I think you need to realize, that you will write. Like when we say you must write, it doesn't say you must write well.
Right. That's true.
And that's okay to write a lot of junk. And what he's saying is, like, you know, he wrote so much stuff that you'll probably never see because it was, to him, not good. And eventually the good stuff rises up. But don't feel like you have to sit at your desk and write like a masterpiece every time.
No, I like that. You know, the idea of, this was a surrealist technique of automatic writing, I believe it was called, where the artist would just sit down with the pen and just whatever flows out of that pen is what flows. And that's actually a really good exercise. You could get some crazy stuff, but because it was surrealism, so they're not censoring. They're not saying, oh, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, or that sentence is weird. No, it would just be like words, whatever is coming to your head, just write it out. And you can burn it afterwards if you want.
I just finished reading Bird by Anne Lamott, and I'm probably going to do one of these things that she suggested. I'm going to write it, but probably for my kids, you know, like if they want to read it in the future. But it's like, write about your life, like your childhood and stuff like that. And
that would be great. Yeah.
But I want to use my typewriter, like actually sit at the typewriter and write it. Because I don't want to, I'm not writing it for publication. I'm not writing it for any other reason except for to have, the point of this is, it's in a chapter about writer's block. And you might say, oh, I have writer's block, so I can't write. And the rule is you must write. So if I can't think of something to write in that moment, I'm going to sit down to typewriter and just write some memory of my history. And that is one way to write. Like, again, we're not saying you must write your novel or you must write whatever you're currently working on. It's you must write.
Yes.
'Cause I have a journal. I write in my journal. I have been revising a story I'm working on. But I also, when I'm revising, I don't feel like I'm writing, I'm just editing.
Mm-hmm. Well, you also write a newsletter every week.
Oh, yeah.
Writing.
Well, yeah, I'm writing that now. Yeah. But each time I try to just push a little bit more, just a tiny bit more to see if I can do something different or better.
I used to write, I don't know if you remember my old blog, not that you would, but I used to write a blog post almost every day, but I wasn't writing fiction then. So one kind of replaced the other.
Mm-hmm.
But that's still writing. I think there's a lot of fear with this first rule. And maybe that's why it is the simplistic statement, you must write. And there's really no getting around that first rule. But
No.
I do think that there is fear attached to that rule. And maybe we can talk about what that is a little bit. I know we've talked about fear in writing a bit, but I think that maybe it's the pressure we put on ourselves to write a great book or a great story instead of just, the rule isn't you must write a great book. It's no, you must write. It doesn't say what.
Right. And when I played bass, I remember one of the first songs I learned was Jumpin' Jack Flash, I think.
Hmm.
And the other one would have been Living After Midnight by Judas Priest, maybe. But they're very simple songs. But I remember when I would practice them, it was not easy for me to do that song, right? And here's my question. Do you think it's different when it comes to learning music? Because I know what the outcome should be. So I know what Jumpin' Jack Flash sounds like, and I could play along with it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, I've mastered that song. There's a clear way of knowing you've achieved it. With writing, unless you're writing someone else's book, how do you feel that we get that satisfaction that we know? Because anybody can sit and type and write. But when do you know, like, okay, I did that. Like, I can now play Jumpin' Jack Flash. I'm going to move on to a new one. What do you think that equivalent would be? Because I think that's the hard part too.
Right, because that's the thing about writing. There shouldn't be any copy aspect to writing the way there is with learning a musical instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're playing the piano, you start with the scales and you work your way up. And you learn songs that other people have written, like, Jumpin' Jack Flash. And then, okay, I can do that. And then maybe when you're more advanced, you're writing your own songs and you're using what you've learned. But with writing, you can copy another writer's style, which I do think people do.
You said do.
I mean, do. I do think people do. I use like 3 do's in one sentence. So you can, I think when I started writing, I was a lot more stilted in my writing because I was copying other style. Like I wanted to sound more intellectual than I am. So I would model my writing after more of the Victorian novels that I loved when I was in college or something, or Russian literature, and I was trying to be very highfalutin. When I read submissions from younger writers, sometimes I kind of sense that. Or also when I was teaching, I can see when someone's trying to write a little over their skis in a way, like a little like
yeah,
like this isn't really your language. You're trying to sound fancy, but it's better to just be simplistic about the language in a way. And that all comes from that comes from practice and learning your style and your voice develop. I mean, that's one thing that will develop the more you practice.
Yeah, it's hard to know though. And I think that's the difference.
It is hard to know.
When you play an instrument, I'll speak as a bass player. I had influences like John Entwistle from The Who and Geddy Lee, and I would play these songs and I would get influenced by how they played because I'm playing what they're playing. And then when I write songs, I might write something that's similar to them, but it's much clearer, I think, in other arts. The same with painting. Like you can copy a painting, but you're right. You can copy style. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm going to write like Stephen King, because you don't know what to write. And eventually
True.
You will figure it out, but you have to start somewhere. And if it helps you, obviously we're not talking about plagiarism, but if it helps you to write in a specific style to write, which is what you must do, then do that.
Right. And if you're right, your style will change if you're going to write in different genres too.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. But you're just talking about like style. And Joe and I went to the Metropolitan Museum of Art the other day. We really had a nice day in New York. And we went to the Degas Manet show. It's like a combined show. It gets into their relationship, their rivalry, how they influenced each other's style, which was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to look at the drawings that are connected with a larger painting, because you see the mistakes, you see how they erase things and rearrange the compositions and change this and change that. It's the study that goes into the larger work. So that shows that these guys don't just hatch this out of their heads, on the first go. They worked really hard to paint like that. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
That's
true. And they practiced a lot.
There's a book I have. It's the contact sheets from Magnum, and it's all photography stuff. And what's so amazing about that book is you see the negative of these famous photographs, and then you see like where they cropped it. So like everybody thinks that this photographer who's super famous and a photo you've seen 100 times was taken and that's what it was. But it's not. Like they took this picture, but later realized they cropped it in a little bit more and it was a better photo. And then in the darkroom back in the day, they would burn and dodge, which is like making areas lighter or darker. And so the camera they didn't just take that picture and there it is. That picture was taken and then brought into a darkroom and experimented with and cropped in different ways. And eventually they came to something that they felt, here is my final photograph. And I think that's missing, even in that art. That's something that people don't understand. And it's the same thing when writing a book. There's so much that goes into that, and the editing, that when you read that book, that's not how it started.
And you see those contact sheets. I don't know if you looked at this one, the one of the Fleetwood Mac Rumors album cover. And you'll see very awkward poses and pictures are like images are crossed out until they get that great shot and everything kind of falls into place. So of course it takes a lot of work, but you're not going to get better if you don't write.
Yeah, and I think that's why these rules are so hard, because it is a discipline like any other art where you have to sit down and work on your craft, and you will get better. It's just not easy to sit there and write garbage. Like that's the thing that really I struggle with. Like,
well, it doesn't have to be garbage.
Yeah, but I'm not saying it's literal garbage. I'm saying that your brain will think that. Like, you know what I mean? With that awful person in your brain that talks to you and you're editing and you're like, wow, this is just crap.
This sucks, yeah.
Yeah, that's not saying it literally, like if someone else read it, they would say this is garbage. But your brain, we're the worst critics. And
and I think there is a way, and this is probably another topic, there is a way to utilize that critic to your advantage during the editing process.
Well,
yes. Not before.
Yes, when you're writing your first draft and things like that, when you're sitting down to write, that critic's no good. But when you're editing, the critic, you don't want to be harsh to the point where you're like, jumping out a window. But
no.
I think what I struggle with the most is I'm looking at it. I know it can be better, but I don't know how to make it better at that moment.
Right. And it can always be better.
Right. And we'll talk about that next week, about perfection and why when you're trying to finish something, it can always be better even when it's finished. So we can save that for next week. But
that's another rule.
Yeah, that's next week's rule. I wrote a story called The Fox Sisters, and I had published it.
One.
Yeah, I published it on Amazon, and no one ever bought it, but someone just bought it like this week. So I'm like, wow, it's on Amazon. I think it's 99 cents, but I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. I don't know how that person found it. What, did they listen to the podcast? Is it some other way?
Are you out there? We want to know.
Yeah, that was exciting.
Yeah, that is exciting. And that's the thing that's cool about getting your work out there, even if it's just a short story, 99-cent short story. Like I have a poetry collection that I put out a couple years ago, and poetry is a pretty tough sell. So I didn't expect to sell a lot, but some random person read it and left a really beautiful review and really loved it. And that just made me feel so good. I want to just keep writing more poetry, which I have another collection that's coming up. But you never know who's going to appreciate it.
That's right. And poetry is a hard sell.
Exactly.
Like you're either someone who adores poetry or you're not. I don't think there's a middle ground.
No, but I do love, like when I was at that indie bookstore, Troubled Sleep, they had a cool indie poetry section. I don't know if you remember Farley's bookstore in New Hope.
Yes,
They
what,
renovated
they're gone?
it. No, they're not gone. No, don't. I panicked too when I saw that it was closed, but they renovated. To me, it's lost some charm, but.
So it's not like that old school bookstore where things are just everywhere, and I'll have to go up and check it out. But
check it out. And they used to at Farley's have that. Remember that section? Now, this is me going back in like the 70s and the 80s with indie poetry, but it's kind of like our zine. It was like Xerox copies.
Yeah, wasn't it like I thought it was when you went in, it was like to the left near the register.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I used to just I loved picking up those poetry books. I'm sure I still have some of them moldering somewhere in a drawer. And there's something just great about it. You're connecting with someone on a level that you don't get when you're just buying like a published work. So a traditionally published work, I should say.
Yeah. So let's close the show with revisiting this first rule. You must write. Remember, it's 3 words. It doesn't say how you must write. It doesn't say what you must write.
Or it doesn't say you must write well.
Yeah. Just write, period. Just sit down, write, whatever that is. Like Regina said, the automatic writing. You could be writing something about a history of yourself. It could be a journal. But write and write and write. And next week we'll be back with rule number 2. You must finish what you start.
That's my favorite one.
That's the one that got us started because I need to. Yeah. I have 2 problems. One is trying to finish what I start, and the second is when I am frustrated, just finishing it without feeling like it shouldn't be finished. Mm-hmm. But we'll get into that next week. And check out all the links that we talked about in the beginning of the show in the show notes, and we'll see you in a week.
Okay, and write something.
Yes.
Between now and then.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
All our links are in the show notes, and we'll be back next week with a new episode.